to C3 Bathurst. We're so glad you jumped on to our YouTube channel. We really believe that you'll have life. Jesus said life in all of its fullness will be yours. And that means you'll be loved, included, free, and equipped. So enjoy this message, and we'll catch you afterwards. God bless. Hey, I want to ask you a question this morning. Where do you go to for help? When the chips are down, when things are battling, when it looks like, there's nothing working, who do you call? Where do you go to? What resource can you find? What's your sort of gut instinct? Is it to ring up your mum? Is it to get online? Is it to make a phone call to the local minister? What's your mechanism for help when everything seems disconnected, when it's kind of looks like nothing can work anymore? Where do you go? What do you do? I want to take you into a journey this morning with Israel. They were stuck. They were in a big pickle, in a place they didn't want to be. And we want to look at this morning of how they found help and what kinds of things they trusted in over that time. So we're going to dive right into the middle of Isaiah this morning as we've been looking at this all month. But what you'll see here is a nation of people. And let me just recap the journey that they've been on a little bit so far. So way back in Genesis 12, God created this nation from Abraham. And he called Abraham from another place and he says, look, go into this land. I'm going to show it to you and I'll give it to you. And you'll be a great person. You'll have many, many descendants and their nations will be great. And this is the land that they'll live in. Now, it took some 400 years for them to get there because they had a detour down in Egypt. And you might know some of the story. They were stuck there in slavery for a long time. But eventually they emerged out of Egypt as not just one or two people, but an entire nation called Israel with 12 tribes. And you might know the story of the Exodus, how floods and plagues and frogs and locusts and things, they made their way out of Egypt and then across the Red Sea, and God parts the Red Sea, and they end up in what they call the wilderness for 40 years. 40 years was kind of because they didn't really trust God. And they didn't expect him to follow through, and they grumbled and complained and didn't believe him. So God said, okay, just have a little bit of a wander until you do believe me. He fed them supernaturally with manna and quails and water. But then under Joshua's leadership, they cross over into that land and conquer the land, and they inherit the land of Israel, Canaan, land of milk and honey, beautiful land. And they live in that land, and that is God's gift to them. It's his promise to them. And they live there. However, God sets it up in Deuteronomy 28. He says, look, if you do these things and love me and follow me, it'll go really well for you. But if you don't, it's not going to go so well. In other words, look, if you include me in your life, do things my way, life is going to be sweet. If you ignore me, I'm going to ignore you. I'm not going to force my ways upon you. It's kind of, you want it, you chase it. Tragically, most of them didn't follow God, and they started to worship other gods that the Bible calls idols. And we're going to explore that a bit today. But the things carved of wood and stone, and because all the other nations that were around them had this sort of pet idols and things that they'd worship instead of the real living God. And somehow they didn't sort of drive out these idols from the land, and they kept kind of being snared by them. And that's the history right through the kings of Israel. And God finally says, he blows a whistle, enough. I really, really love you too much to let you go into that space. I want to snap you out of this. I want you to wake up. I want you to come back to me. But you're not going to realize that until you're disconnected from my presence. And so he sends them over into Babylon, into exile for 70 years. As a wake-up call, I love you too much just to let you go. And so when they're in Babylon, they can't seem to shake this addiction for other gods. I mean, gods that are not really gods, idols. Things that we try to put godlike features on. They used to literally carve things out of wood and stone and put them up and worship them. Now, curiously, Isaiah has lots and lots to say about these idols. And right through, there's about 20 references from chapters 40 to 48 around about idols. And we're going to explore some of those and then have a think about what does that mean for us today in our Western world. Ready? Now, as I read through this, I was stirred by the I guess the sense of idol worship that God's people had, even though they didn't work. And Isaiah starts taunting them about their idol worship because they're looking for help. And Isaiah almost ridicules them around 4 key areas. Here they are. Let's look at the key area and let's look then at the scriptures that talk about why those things don't work. So the first thing is authority. Let's have a look at Isaiah 40. This is 18 to 25. Isaiah writes from God's perspective. He's kind of prophesying. He says, "To whom then will you liken God? Or what likeness compares to him? An idol?" He says, a craftsman casts it, a goldsmith overlays it with gold and then casts it for silver chains. And if he's too impoverished for that sort of offering, he chooses wood that will not rot. And he sets out a skillful craftsman to set the idol up that will not move. So in other words, they've made these things. There's a problem, isn't there? Do you get the problem? Like, why would you worship something that you've made? Or why would you worship something that you've ordered and had made, Why would you go into a forest and get wood and then carve it and then set it up and worship it, clearly knowing that it's just a piece of wood? And then in verse 21, it says, "Do you not know? Do you not hear? Has it not been told you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth? It is He, it's God. It is He who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them like a tent to dwell in. It's He who brings princes to nothing and makes the rulers of the earth its emptiness. Scarcely they've planted, scarcely sown, and He blows on them and they wither. To whom will you compare me, that I should be like Him, says the Holy One." In other words, are you really going to compare me, the one who created heavens and earth with all authority, to a piece of wood or rock or stone, even if it's got gold on top of it? I mean, really? I can hear that word from God. Really? Why are you trusting in the authority of a piece of wood compared to the authority of the real God who made heaven and earth? So they're looking to these idols to find authority. The second one is they're looking to these idols for help. Again, Isaiah goes on in chapter 41, verses 7 to 10. He says, "The craftsman strengthens the goldsmith, and he who smooths out with the hammer, him who strikes the anvil, says to the soldering, it's good." And they strengthen it with nails so it can't be moved. Isaiah is describing the process of them making it. This is good. Like I've got the solder in there and I've strengthened it with nails. This is a good bit of idol, But then verse 8, "But you, Israel, my servant Jacob, whom I chose, the offspring of Abraham, my friend. You, who I took from the ends of the earth and called from its farthest corners, saying to you, you're my servant, I've chosen you and not cast you off. Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." Phenomenal promise in Scripture. And we often quote that, but we don't see the previous verse is actually answering the call that his people are looking for help in the wrong places. They're looking to a craftsman to make an idol that will help them in life. And God says, hello people. I made you, I called you, I empowered you. Not only that, you're my friend. You're my servant. I've chosen you. I am your helper. I will strengthen you. I'll help you. I'll uphold you. Why would you look to a piece of wood for help? Can you see the pattern that Isaiah is sending with his little taunts and little, it's kind of supposed to shock his people in this area. All right, there's two more. I mean, it's so fun. It's so fun. Guidance. Guidance again. Let's look at Isaiah 42, 16 to 17. He says, I will lead the blind in a way that they do not know, in paths that they have not known. I will guide them. I will turn the darkness before them into light, the rough places into level ground. These are the things I do, and I do not forsake them. You know what God is saying here? He says, I guide people. I'm going to guide you. I'm going to lead you in ways that you don't know, in paths that you've not been down before. I'm going to turn the darkness into light and the rough places into level ground. Because that's what I do. I am your God, and I guide you people. And I don't forsake you. But in verse 17 he says, but they are turned back and utterly put to shame who trust in carved idols and who say to metal images, you are our gods. In other words, if you're walking down a path and you've got God guiding you, leveling out the path, illuminating the darkness, you're in safe hands. He says, I won't forsake you. He says, but you're going to turn back. If you trust in carved idols, this is verse 17, you're going to be put to shame and turn back because these idols obviously can't level out the ground. Because they're a no God. They're nothing. So don't trust in them for guidance. Don't pray to these things. They're really not going to help you because there is only one living God. And this God not only loves you, but will guide you. And then there's power. Again, we're asking the question, where do you turn when you need help? You need power. You need help, guidance, power, love, protection. And Isaiah 46, these are the names of idols, okay? Bel bows down. Nebo stoops. They're idols on beasts and livestock. These things you carry are borne as burdens on weary beasts. Now understand this. When they move these gods around, these idols, they have to put them on the back of animals. Okay, so when the cow or whatever the thing is strapped to kneels down and drinks water or something, the idols also have to bow down. I mean, it's a ridiculous thought, isn't it? To have a god, an idol, being carried by a beast of burden that has to stop and bow down every time the animal does. And then Isaiah says, listen to me, O house of Jacob. All the remnant of the house of Israel, listen, listen. You have been born by me from before your birth, carried from the womb, even to your old age. I am he. And the grey hairs, I will carry you. I have made and I will bear and I will carry and will save. Can you see what just happened there? God is saying the idols have to be carried on the backs of animals, and when they stoop down, they stoop down. He says, but actually, I, the real God, carry you. Got it? I'm not just one to be carried around. In fact, it's all upside down. I'm the God who carries you. I am the one who has power in your life. I am the one who will see it through. I'm the one who will sustain it, because you don't have to carry me around so you can worship me in some different place. No, from before you were born, I've been carrying you. It's a phenomenal thought. True power comes from God alone. He carries us carefully, loves us. He knows the end from the beginning. This is such an interesting passage. And as you read, and I encourage you to read Isaiah 40 right through to Isaiah 66. And you will see these kind of snippets of taunting about how ridiculous the idols are. Eugene Peterson, in his Message translation, puts it like this, and I'm paraphrasing Isaiah 44. You ready? This is kind of funny. The woodworker draws up plans for his no God. That's what Eugene calls idols. The woodworker draws up plans for his no God, traces it on a block of wood. He shapes it with chisels and planes it into human shape. A beautiful woman, a handsome man, ready to be placed in a chapel. He first cuts down cedar, or maybe picks out a pine or an oak and lets it grow in a strong forest, nourished by the rain. And then it can serve a double purpose. Part he uses as firewood for keeping him warm and baking bread. And from the other part, he sets a god and that he worships. He carves it into a god shape and prays before it. And with half, he makes a fire to warm himself and barbecue his supper. He eats his fill and sits satisfied with his stomach full and his feet warmed by the fire. He says, this is the life. And he still has half left for a god, made to his personal design, a handy, convenient, no God to worship whenever he likes. Save me, you're my God, he can pray. Isn't this funny? He says, pretty stupid, wouldn't you say? Don't they have eyes in their heads? Are their brains working at all? Doesn't it occur to them to say, half of this tree I used for firewood, I baked bread, roasted meat, and enjoyed a good meal, and now I've used the rest to make a repulsive no God? Here I am praying to a stick of wood. This lover of emptiness, of nothing, is so out of touch with reality, so far gone that he can't even look at what he's doing. He can't even look at the no God stick of wood in his hand and say, this is crazy. That's the Message version of Isaiah 44. It's funny. Until we look at ourselves a little. Until we take a bit of a look into our society. Until we remember, I wonder where we're at now. I wonder where our society is at with these things. Do we call to mind the God who made us for power, authority, help? Or do we have other idols? Now, we don't like the word idol in our world today. And you might be furiously thinking through what kind of idol have I worshipped? Did I bring something home from Bali and is it in the land room? Maybe that's the idol. Maybe it's my CD player set, for those who remember what CDs are. What is it? What could that be today? Well, let me share a few thoughts, just a few thoughts. I wonder where we find our authority today. Because I wonder if the authority that we have is me, us, personal, me, you and I. We share the authority. We think that we are our own authority. The biggest offense that you can do to someone is ask them to think and believe something that's different to what they actually want to believe and think in. We like to be our own world, the shaper of our own destiny, the captain of our souls. We want to be our own individual, and don't anyone come and tell me that what I'm thinking is wrong. That's the biggest sin you can make in today's world. I am my own authority. I make the rules around here. I believe what I want to believe. Until, the self kind of crumbles sometimes. Until we hit a wall, until we get sick, until something breaks. Maybe we might die eventually. We kind of lost track of the fact that we're making these kind of little castles everywhere of our own world and protection. But really, how strong is the human self, really? Should we really be worshipping ourselves so much and putting ourselves on such a high pedestal when really humanity is pretty frail? I wonder, is that what Isaiah would say to our culture today? Have a look at your own idol of authority. Maybe it's the self and the view that our Western culture has put on the high value of self, except when everything falls apart. And we don't really have an answer for that in that worldview. I wonder about help. What's the idol of help in our world when God is saying, cry out to me? We look to the government, perhaps, or to other people. So when the floods come again and again and again, it's of course it's the government's fault. They haven't got the right climate change policy. Of course, they should have been thinking about the dam years ago. Of course, they should have reorganized the levee banks. We like to look for help for someone else. And so we have all these committees and organizations and try and make the difference between what God can do and what we can do. Now, I'm all for community help and governments and good governance, etc. But the problem is, sometimes we create an idol out of that because ultimately governments fail. They're people, they're institutions. And so we might put too much authority and too much weight on finding help in sources that are outside of God. What about guidance? What would be the idol guidance of our day? Where do you go to for help, for guidance? What should I do next? I tell you, here's the answer. Just Google it. How do I cook something? How do I have a good marriage? How do I raise my kids? We looked online, even ahead of trusted friends, family, grandma, mum, dad, aunts, uncles, wise people. They wouldn't understand, did they? But Mr. Google sure does. He understands life. And so we find the guidance that we need instead of actually praying and asking Jesus about it. Why would we want to do that when we've got a phone in front of us? Can you see how we could so easily replace God with Google? At that point, it becomes an idol. And what about power? Where do we go to find power and strength? I mean, our world is pretty sophisticated. We can make rocket ships that go into space. We can make so many incredible advances from engineering, civil engineering, roads, and just dams, beautiful things, huge buildings. We've got a building that's almost 1 kilometer tall. I mean, the power of humanity is incredible. But where do you go to when you need a little bit more power? Because our world gets pretty complex and a bit crazy. And those idols crumble when we ultimately can't find the power that we need in the human constructs that we have around us. I wonder if sometimes we replace the power of God with the power of humanity. Now, I haven't even touched on perhaps the idols of huge amounts of money or wealth or significance or substantial income. These are the things we often make idols out. Or maybe you've got a possession that's so close to your heart that you can't get rid of. And they're pretty common little idols, and they're not so hard to deal with. I think that the tougher ones are really the idols of where we've replaced ourself and our human system from God. Just some thoughts. But I really encourage you to look into Isaiah 40 to 66, particularly Isaiah 40 to 50, and have a reflection. What is God saying about idols? And what will that say today? Because these are prophetic words that can speak not just to that era, but also to our current era. Now, in closing, what is stunning about this chunk of scripture between Isaiah 40 and Isaiah 66 is right in the middle. 26 chapters, okay? Right in the middle, 13 chapters in, we land at Isaiah 53. I find this astonishing. In Isaiah 53, we meet Jesus. Old Testament, some 700 years before Jesus. We meet him in the pages of Isaiah. It's a phenomenally complete picture of Christ. And I believe that Isaiah saw Jesus way back then. It wasn't the complete picture, but so many things that were brought out in Isaiah 53 are the answer, the power, the authority, the help that Isaiah is saying He's basically saying, don't trust in this, don't trust in it, don't do this, don't do this. But hey, there is one coming who will be the power that you need, who will be the love that you need. There's one coming. Isaiah could see Jesus from hundreds of years before. He says, there is one coming. He's coming, he's coming, he's coming. And this one will solve all the problems. And this is the one to worship. This is the one who you will have the power and authority and protection with. He's the one. Don't waste your time on all these ridiculous carvings of stone and wood. Don't waste your time. They cannot help you. But there's coming one who will. Let me read you a couple of thoughts. Isaiah 53, and again, encourage you to do this. He says, he was despised and rejected by man, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. We was despised and we esteemed him not. That's so true of Jesus on the cross. But this is what Jesus did. He says, and this is Isaiah 53:4, surely he's borne our griefs. He's carried our sorrows. And we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his wounds we are healed. He's saying that Jesus bore our sins, our stripes, our sicknesses. He actually dealt with those. And he's the one, therefore, we should worship. That the will of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. And therefore, sing. Isaiah 54. Sing, rejoice. It's such a rich text. Seek the Lord, return to the Lord while he may be found. The text goes on and on and on to talk about the promises that we find. The whole passage pivots around Isaiah 53. From then on, we just discover the blessing of God and the favor of God, all built around the person of Jesus. As the Israelites untangle themselves from their past and their idol worship and the things that just have dragged them down, suddenly there's a vision and a picture of the one who is to come. That's Jesus. And he's the one who will provide everything they need for the return. Who in your world is there? Who in your world is stuck in Babylon? Who in your world is trapped up with some kind of thought and worldview that's disconnected from Jesus, but desperately they want to know him again? Are you the one to carry the vision and the picture of Jesus, the real answer that will then cause them a spark of life to return to him? I'm so excited about this season of the return. And we're going to be praying into this more and more the next few weeks and inviting and just smoothing that pathway, because I'm really believing with you to see your friends and your family return to Christ, return to the presence of God in Jerusalem, metaphorically speaking, and that there will be many, many people who come to enjoy the rich fellowship of Jesus again. Well, God bless you. Thank you for letting me share some of my passion from this part of the Bible. I really am excited by it and looking forward to catching up with you all next week. God bless.
Hey, thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, or you can download our church app to keep up to date with what's going on. And of course, if you're in the Bathurst area, we'd love you to pop in and say hello.
Wonderful. See you soon.